The old recipe card trembled in my hands, its yellowed edges soft from decades of use. But these weren't my grandmother's careful instructions. Someone had altered them, changed the measurements, added new ingredients. My mother's angular handwriting defaced the original, crossing out the essence of what made our family's maple butter tarts special. I'm Madeline, and until today, I thought I understood the rules of our family's power games. But this discovery in my mother's kitchen changed everything. Something wrong with the recipe? My mother's voice carried that familiar note of superiority as she arranged dessert plates on her pristine granite counter. You changed Grandma Rose's tarts. I held up the card, evidence of her betrayal. Why would you do that? She barely glanced at me, continuing her methodical arrangement. I improved them. The old recipe was too sweet, too provincial. We need to evolve with the times. The word provincial stung like an accusation. My grandmother had built our family's reputation on these recipes, on traditions my mother now dismissed as beneath her. Annie will be devastated, I said, knowing my sister had spent years perfecting the original recipe, desperate for our mother's approval. Your sister needs to understand that holding on to the past won't get her anywhere. My mother's diamond bracelet caught the light as she reached for the serving tray. Stephen agrees with me. We need to modernize our approach. Of course, Stephen agreed. Our family friend had been whispering in my mother's ear for years, encouraging every change that pushed us further from who we used to be. The doorbell chimed and voices filled the foyer. My father's quiet murmur, Annie's bright laugh, my husband Ethan's warm greeting. I tucked the recipe card into my pocket, a piece of evidence I wasn't ready to share. During dinner, I watched my mother serve her modified tarts with triumphant flourish. A new twist on an old favourite, she announced, her smile sharp as a blade. Annie took one bite and froze. Her eyes met mine across the table, recognition and hurt flooding her face. But before she could speak, Stephen jumped in with elaborate praise. "Christine, you've outdone yourself," he gushed. "Such sophistication. This is exactly what the family name needs." My father studied his plate in silence, another small surrender in a long history of looking away. Later, as I helped clean up, I found an envelope tucked behind the cookbook shelf. Inside was a letter from my grandmother to my mother dated just weeks before she died. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Christine, I trust you to protect our family's heritage, not reshape it to match your ambitions. These recipes, these traditions, they're our story, our truth. Promise me you'll honour them." My mother had clearly made no such promise. Instead, she'd waited until my grandmother was gone, then started systematically erasing her influence, replacing authenticity with what she called refinement. "Find anything interesting?" My mother appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I slipped the letter into my pocket alongside the recipe card, just remembering how things used to be. "The past is overrated, dear." She took the cookbook from my hands and returned it to its shelf. "I'm doing what's best for this family's future." But whose future? And at what cost? As I drove home that night, the letter and recipe card burning a hole in my pocket, I realized I had a choice to make. I could stay quiet, preserve the peace like my father, or I could fight for the truth my grandmother had tried to protect. My phone buzzed. A text from Annie. "Did you see what she did to the tarts?" I pulled into my driveway, making my decision. Some recipes weren't meant to be changed. Some truths needed to be preserved, no matter the cost. And my mother was about to learn that not everyone in this family would bow to her version of reality. Annie's culinary school acceptance letter lay crumpled on my mother's antique dining table, its prestigious letterhead barely visible beneath the creases. "A cooking certificate?" My mother's voice dripped with disdain. "Really, Annie, I thought we discussed focusing on something more substantial." I watched my sister's shoulders tense as she stood her ground. "It's not just any program. It's le cordon." "It's a waste of your potential," my mother cut in, sliding the letter aside with one manicured finger. "Stephen mentioned an opening at his consulting firm. That's the kind of opportunity you should be pursuing. Stephen, hovering near the china cabinet, nodded sagely. The business world would suit you, Annie. Your mother and I were just discussing your natural talent for organization. I gripped my water glass tighter, recognizing their practiced routine. Stephen always there to reinforce my mother's agenda, always ready with the perfect suggestion to redirect our lives according to her plan. I don't want to work in consulting, Annie said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to honor Grandma's legacy. The recipes, the traditions. Those outdated recipes, my mother laughed, the sound brittle against the formal dining room walls. We've moved beyond that, dear. Times change. Families evolve. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Like how you evolved Grandma's maple butter tarts. The room went still. Stephen's expression sharpened with interest as my mother's eyes narrowed. Madeline, she warned, we've discussed this. But Annie was already pulling out her phone, fingers trembling as she pulled up a photo. Look what I found in Grandma's old storage unit yesterday. She slid the phone across the table. Her original recipe journal. The complete collection. Everything you said was lost. My mother's face paled slightly before she recovered. Those old things. I had them cleared out years ago. Clearly not everything, I said, watching her carefully. What else did you try to erase, Mother? Before she could answer, my father appeared in the doorway, looking more alert than I'd seen him in years. Ethan stood just behind him, his expression grave. Christine, my father said quietly, we need to talk. My mother's hand fluttered to her throat. Bradley, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time. My husband stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. I found these while helping clear out the old office files. Stephen moved closer, but my father blocked his path with a subtle shift. This is family business, Stephen. Perhaps you should go. For once, Stephen had no smooth response. He retreated with a backward glance at my mother, leaving her to face whatever truth lay in that folder alone. My father opened it slowly, revealing documents I couldn't quite see. I've kept quiet too long about what happened before your grandmother died. About the changes to her will, the missing heirlooms, the convenient timing of it all. Bradley. My mother's voice held a warning, but he continued. Our daughters deserve to know the truth about their inheritance, about why your mother really... Enough! She slammed her hand on the table, making the crystal water glasses jump. I protected this family. Everything I did was to secure our future, our reputation. By erasing our past. Annie's voice cracked. By making me feel like I was never good enough. I reached for my sister's hand under the table, feeling it tremble in mine. What's in those documents, Father? He began to answer, but a glint of metal caught my eye. Behind my mother's chair, partially visible through the glass cabinet doors, something golden reflected the afternoon light. Something I remembered from my childhood, something my mother had claimed was lost years ago. My grandmother's cherished locket, the one that supposedly disappeared the week before she died. The one that, according to family legend, contained a secret that could change everything. My mother followed my gaze, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear cross her face. Madeline, she said softly, all pretense gone from her voice. Some secrets need to stay buried. But as I stood to reach for the cabinet door, I knew we were well past keeping secrets. It was time for the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. The golden locket lay heavy in my palm as my father's confession filled his study. Each word stripped away another layer of our family's carefully maintained facade. Your mother and Stephen orchestrated everything during those final weeks, he said, his voice rough with regret. I knew what they were doing, but I was too much of a coward to stop them. What exactly did they do? I traced the locket's intricate engravings, remembering how my grandmother used to let me hold it while she told stories of our family's history. They convinced your grandmother she was losing her mind, moved things around, hid important documents, changed dates in her calendar. He poured himself another whiskey, hand trembling. Stephen would visit, plant seeds of doubt about her memory. Then your mother would swoop in, offering to help. Manage everything. The study door creaked open and Annie slipped in, her face pale. I just got off the phone with Grandma's old nurse. She confirmed it. Mother and Stephen were controlling who could visit, what information got through. And you just watched it happen. I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice as I turned to our father. He met my gaze, then looked away. They had leverage. A mistake I made years ago that could have destroyed us all. Stephen knew about it somehow. What mistake? The original family business wasn't as legitimate as everyone believes. I made some choices. Choices that Stephen threatened to expose, unless I played along with their plan. Annie sank into the leather armchair, her culinary school acceptance letter still clutched in her hand. So everything, the changed recipes, the missing heirlooms, Grandma's revised will, it was all built on lies? Your mother believes she's protecting our legacy, our father said. In her mind, the end justifies any means. I opened the locket, expecting to find the familiar family photo. Instead, a tiny key fell into my hand. That's it, our father whispered. The key to the truth. Your grandmother told me about it the night before. Before everything changed. There's a safety deposit box at First National. Stephen and your mother never knew about it. The study door burst open. My mother stood there, Stephen at her shoulder like a dark shadow. I should have known you'd break eventually, Bradley. My mother's voice could have frozen flame. After everything I've done to protect this family, to protect your secrets, you didn't protect anything, I cut in. You destroyed what made our family special. You twisted Grandma's legacy into something she would have hated. I made it better, she hissed. Stronger, more sophisticated, and I won't let you tear it apart with ancient history and sentimental nonsense. Stephen stepped forward, his usual smooth manner replaced by something harder. Think carefully about your next move, Madeline. Some truths are better left buried, for everyone's sake. But Annie stood up, her shoulders straight. I'm done being buried, done letting you decide what's best for me, for all of us. She turned to me. We need to get to that safety deposit box. You'll be cut off, our mother warned. Both of you. Everything I've built, everything I've achieved. You mean everything you've stolen? I closed my fist around the key. Everything you manipulated and lied for? Bradley, Stephen's voice carried a warning. Remember what's at stake. Our father stood, and for the first time in years I saw strength in his stance. No more threats, Stephen. No more secrets. He moved to stand between us and them. My daughters deserve the truth, whatever it costs me. My mother's mask cracked, real fear showing through. You can't. The consequences will be what they will be, I said, taking Annie's hand. But we're done living your version of our family's story. As we left the study, Annie squeezed my hand. I've been offered a position at a culinary school in Paris, she whispered. I was afraid to tell anyone, but now, maybe it's time to break free completely. The key pressed into my palm, a small metal promise of revelations to come. Tomorrow we would open that safety deposit box, unleash whatever truths our grandmother had protected. But tonight, watching my sister's newfound courage, I realized some family bonds were strengthening even as others crumbled. Behind us, I heard my mother's sharp voice rise in argument with our father, but for once, her words held no power over me. We had our own legacy to reclaim now, one truth at a time. Ruby pushed her untouched coffee aside and stared at me across her kitchen table. You realize your mother won't just roll over and accept defeat, right? She'll strike back harder. I placed my grandmother's locket between us, its golden surface catching the morning light. What choice do I have? The safety deposit box could destroy everything, Ruby cut in, including Annie's chance at a fresh start in Paris. She tapped her fingers on the table. Maybe there's a smarter way to handle this. What do you mean? Your mother's power comes from controlling the narrative, so change it. Use her own tactics against her. Ruby's expression hardened. Give Annie the spotlight she deserves, but do it publicly where your mother can't interfere. The idea felt wrong, yet familiar, like looking into a warped mirror of my mother's methods. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Need to talk. Found something in the old company files. Come home now. I found my husband in his home office, surrounded by scattered papers. His face was ashen. Remember those missing insurance documents from your grandmother's estate? He held up a folder. They weren't missing. They were hidden. Your mother and Stephen created a separate trust account 3 days before your grandmother died. My throat tightened. How much? Enough to fund Stephen's consulting firm, the one he keeps trying to push Annie into. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. There's more. Your father's signature is on these papers, but the dates don't match. They're forged. A knock at the front door interrupted us. Annie burst in, clutching her phone. The culinary school rescinded my acceptance. Someone sent them an email claiming I plagiarized recipes for my application portfolio. The pieces clicked together. Mother. Stephen delivered the news personally. Annie's voice cracked. He offered me that consulting position again, said it was my best option now. I thought of Ruby's suggestion about using my mother's tactics. The idea didn't feel so wrong anymore. What's in the safety deposit box? Ethan asked quietly. I don't know, but we're finding out today. I grabbed my car keys, then stopped. Annie, call the local paper. The one Mother hates. Tell them you're hosting a traditional cooking demonstration next week. Say you're honouring Grandmother's legacy. Annie's eyes widened. Mother will be furious. Exactly. She'll be so focused on stopping that she won't see us accessing the safety deposit box. I'll keep digging through these files, Ethan said. There has to be more evidence of what they did. At the bank, Annie's hands shook as I inserted the key. Inside the box lay a single envelope and a small leather diary. The envelope contained photos, our mother and Stephen at a hotel, dates stamped from the week before our grandmother died. But it was the diary that made my blood run cold. Our grandmother's last entries detailed everything: the manipulation, the gaslighting, the systematic dismantling of her control over her own life. She'd known what they were doing, had documented it all, while pretending to succumb to their influence. The final page held a letter addressed to me. Madeline, if you're reading this, they succeeded in silencing me, but they didn't win. The real estate trust, the one Christine claims I dissolved, it's still active, hidden under a different name. All the properties, the true family recipes, everything. It's protected. The account details are encoded in the family photos you used to love studying with me. Remember how I taught you to look for patterns? A heavy thud made us jump. Stephen stood in the doorway, his usual smooth demeanour replaced by barely controlled rage. Your mother warned you about digging into the past, he said. Now you've forced our hand. Annie clutched the diary to her chest. What are you going to do? Destroy more of our lives? On the contrary, he pulled out his phone. Bradley, it's time. Tell Christine to execute Plan B. As he turned to leave, a manila envelope slid under the bank's side door. My name was written across the front in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single document, a trust agreement I'd never seen before, with Stephen's signature next to a sum that made my heart stop. The game had just changed, but I wasn't sure anymore who was really playing whom. The family photos spread across my dining room table like a mosaic of lies. Each image held a piece of my grandmother's code, numbers and letters hidden in background details, dates that didn't quite match reality. Beside them lay Stephen's trust agreement, its implications too massive to ignore. He's been embezzling from the family trust, Ethan said, pointing to the document, using your mother's influence to cover his tracks. Annie paced behind us, her cooking demonstration flyer clutched in her hands. The newspaper's running the story tomorrow. Mother's already called 3 times, threatening legal action. Let her. I traced the pattern in one of the photos, a seemingly casual arrangement of books that held account numbers. She can't stop us now. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw my father standing alone on the porch, his shoulders heavy with resignation. Your mother knows about the safety deposit box, he said as soon as I opened the door. Stephen's already moving funds offshore. Whatever you're planning, you need to do it now. Why should we trust you? Annie's voice cracked. You helped them destroy Grandma's legacy. He pulled out an old envelope. Because I kept copies of everything, every document they forged, every account they manipulated. I was a coward. But I wasn't completely blind. My phone buzzed. Ruby sending a warning. Christine just left my house. She's coming your way, and she knows about the encoded photos. We need to call an emergency family meeting, I said, gathering the evidence. Tonight, before they can hide anything else. She won't come, my father warned. She will if you tell her you're ready to confess everything publicly. I met his gaze. Are you? 2 hours later, we sat around my mother's formal dining room table, the same place where this had all started with a modified recipe. The evidence lay before us. Photos, documents, my grandmother's diary, Stephen's trust agreement. My mother's face remained impassive as I laid out each piece. Only her fingers, drumming steadily on the mahogany surface, betrayed her agitation. So, she said finally, you've appointed yourself judge and jury of this family's choices. Choice? Annie stood, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. You mean like choosing to sabotage my culinary school acceptance or choosing to steal Grandma's legacy? I protected this family's future, our mother snapped. Everything I did was for yourself, I cut in, sliding forward the hotel photos of her and Stephen. Including this? Colour drained from her face as she recognized the images. Stephen moved to speak, but my father's voice cut through the tension. I have already sent copies to the family lawyer, he said quietly, along with evidence of the embezzlement. Stephen's composure cracked. You sanctimonious old fool. You think exposing this will hurt just me? Your own criminal past is nothing compared to what you two did. My father stood, addressing our mother. Christine, it's over. The truth about Mother's will, the trust fund, all of it. It comes out now, or I go to the authorities myself. Our mother's laugh held no humour. You're bluffing. You never had the spine. I opened my grandmother's diary to the final entry. Read it. Read how she knew exactly what you were doing to her, how she protected the real estate trust from you both. What real estate trust? Stephen demanded. Annie smiled for the first time in days. The one that still owns all the properties. The one Grandma left to us, hidden in plain sight. Our mother's hand shot out, reaching for the diary, but I pulled it back. Touch it and I call the newspaper right now. I'm sure they'd love to run this story alongside Annie's cooking demonstration. You wouldn't dare destroy this family's reputation, she hissed. No, Mother. You already did that. I stood gathering the evidence. You have until morning to decide. Resign from all family business dealings and support Annie's culinary career. Or we expose everything. As we left, Stephen's angry voice followed us. This isn't over. But looking at Annie's determined face and my father's newfound strength, I knew it was. The only question was how much damage our mother would cause before accepting her defeat. My phone buzzed again. An anonymous email containing one line. Check the foundation of the old summer house. The game wasn't over yet. It was just moving to a new playing field. The summer house's foundation crumbled beneath our flashlight beams, decades of secrets hidden in its shadows. Annie held the light steady while I pried loose a brick, revealing a metal lockbox wedged deep within the wall. Should we open it here? Annie whispered. Before I could answer, floodlights blazed to life, blinding us. Stephen's voice cut through the darkness. I believe that belongs to your mother. He wasn't alone. 2 men in suits flanked him, their expressions professionally blank. Behind them, our mother emerged from the shadows. Did you really think I wouldn't protect my interests? She gestured to the men. Corporate security. They're here to recover stolen company property. Stolen? I clutched the lockbox tighter. Like how you stole Grandma's legacy. Your grandmother was losing her grip on reality. Our mother's voice hardened. I did what was necessary, just like I'm doing now. One of the men stepped forward. Hand over the box, or we'll be forced to involve the authorities. Go ahead, Annie challenged. We'll tell them everything. Stephen smiled. Including how your father's past indiscretions led to an innocent man's death. That's what's in that box. Proof of Bradley's greatest shame. Your mother protected him, protected all of you, by burying it here. The lockbox suddenly felt heavier. You're lying. Am I? Our mother moved closer. Why do you think your father kept quiet all these years? Ask him about the night of the accident. Ask him whose body they never found. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Don't give them anything. Ruby found something. Coming now. But Stephen was already reaching for the box. Your choice, Madeline. Surrender it, or watch your father go to prison. Annie grabbed my arm. They're bluffing. They have to be. The sound of tires on gravel cut through the tension. Headlights swept across us as Ethan's car approached, but another vehicle blocked its path. A police cruiser. I warned you there would be consequences, our mother said softly. The police have some questions about certain missing financial documents. Documents last seen in your possession. My heart sank as I realized her plan. She'd reported us for theft, turning our evidence against her into a weapon. It's over, girls. Stephen reached for the box again. Don't make this worse than it needs to be. The police officer approached, hand resting on his belt. We received a report of trespassing and theft. No, Annie's voice cracked. You don't understand. They're the ones who own this property. Our mother cut in smoothly. I have the deed, right here. But something in her voice caught my attention. A slight tremor, barely noticeable. She was lying about the deed. The property was part of the hidden real estate trust. The officer reached for the lockbox. I'll need to take that as evidence. In that moment, I made a choice. I dropped the box, letting it shatter against the foundation stones, papers scattered everywhere, caught in the wind and darkness. No! Stephen lunged forward, scrambling to gather the flying documents. Our mother's composure cracked as she dove for the papers, revealing her desperation. The officer's attention shifted, watching their frantic attempts to collect specific documents while ignoring others. Interesting priorities for supposedly stolen property. Ethan's voice came from behind us. He stood with Ruby, both recording everything on their phones. But our small victory felt hollow as I spotted one particular document among the scattered papers. A newspaper clipping about a fatal accident from 30 years ago, with our father's name prominently featured. My mother met my eyes, her expression both triumphant and wounded. Still think you're protecting the family legacy? Some secrets exist for a reason, Madeline. Some truths destroy everything they touch. As police lights flashed across the summer house's weathered walls, I realized we'd reached a point of no return. We'd exposed our mother's deceptions, but at what cost? The real truth about our father lay scattered in the darkness, waiting to either save or destroy us all. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. The message contained just 4 words. I saw the accident. The anonymous witness's statement lay on my mother's polished desk like a live grenade. Beside it, Ruby's forensic analysis of the accident scene photos revealed what really happened that night, and who was actually behind the wheel. It wasn't Dad at all, was it? I kept my voice steady as my mother paced her study. It was Stephen. You have no idea what you're talking about. But her fingers trembled as she reached for her ever-present glass of wine. The witness remembers everything. How Stephen was driving, how you helped cover it up. I placed the old newspaper clipping next to the statement. You let Dad take the blame, then used his guilt to control him for decades. The study door opened. Stephen entered, his usual smoothness replaced by barely contained panic. The board members are calling. Someone leaked documents about the embezzlement. That would be me. Annie stepped in behind him, holding up her phone. Every transaction, every manipulated account, all sent to the ethics committee 20 minutes ago. Our mother's glass shattered against her desk. You ungrateful... Save it, I cut in. We also found Grandma's original will, the one you destroyed and replaced. She left everything to Annie and me, with Dad as executor. Not you, never you. Everything I did was to protect this family. She whirled on Stephen. Tell them why we had to take control. But Stephen was already backing toward the door. Christine, I think it's time we... Don't you dare. Her voice could have frozen flame. After everything I've done for you, everything I covered up. Like the real estate fraud? My father's voice made us all turn. He stood in the doorway, holding a familiar metal box. a second lockbox from the summer house. Or should we discuss the offshore accounts? Stephen lunged for the box, but Ethan stepped out from behind my father, blocking his path. The police are very interested in those accounts, Stephen, especially the ones tied to known criminal enterprises. You're bluffing, our mother whispered, but her face had gone pale. I pulled out my grandmother's locket, opening it to reveal a tiny USB drive. Everything's here. Every transaction, every cover-up, every lie. Grandma knew what you were planning. She left us the breadcrumbs to find the truth. You can't prove any of this, Stephen snarled, but his eyes darted between the exits like a trapped animal. Annie moved to block the doorway. The witness is waiting at the police station right now, ready to tell them exactly what happened the night of the accident. Our mother's composure finally shattered. I protected you, she pointed at our father. I saved you from prison, saved this family from disgrace. No, he said quietly. You used my shame to build your own power, but I'm done being your puppet. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. It's over, Mother. I placed my hand on the locket. Grandma's real legacy ends here, with the truth. Stephen made a break for the side door, but Ruby appeared, blocking his escape. Going somewhere. The police would love to hear about those offshore accounts. Our mother sank into her chair, decades of careful control crumbling around her. You'll destroy everything. The family name, our reputation. No. Annie stepped forward, her voice strong. We're reclaiming it, starting with this. She pulled out a familiar recipe card. The original maple butter tart recipe, unaltered and pure. The study doors burst open as police officers entered, warrant in hand. As they read Stephen his rights, our mother stared at us with a mixture of fury and disbelief. You really think you've won? Her whisper carried across the chaos. Some secrets should stay buried. Some truths will haunt you forever. Maybe, I agreed, watching as the officers led Stephen away. But we're done living in the shadow of your lies. As the police began their search of the study, Annie squeezed my hand. Through the window, camera flashes lit up the driveway. Tomorrow's headlines already writing themselves. Our mother's carefully constructed empire was crumbling, but something stronger was rising from its ashes. Something built on truth, not manipulation. On love, not control. The cost had been high, but as I held my grandmother's locket, I knew we'd finally honoured her real legacy. Not the one our mother had tried to create, but the one written in recipes, sealed in letters, and preserved in the hearts of those who remembered what family really meant. The maple butter tarts filled my grandmother's kitchen with their familiar sweetness as Annie pulled another batch from the oven. Through the window, reporters still lingered at the property gate, hungry for more details about Stephen's arrest and our mother's public disgrace. Perfect golden brown, Annie said, setting the tarts beside a stack of newspapers. Their headlines screamed of financial scandal and decades-old cover-ups, but we'd protected our father from the worst revelations. Some truths were ours to keep. Grandma would be proud, I said, touching the locket now permanently around my neck. Not just of the tarts. The kitchen door creaked open. Our father entered, looking lighter somehow, despite everything. The estate lawyers finished reviewing the original will. Everything's being transferred back to you girls, just as your grandmother intended. And Mother. Annie's voice held more curiosity than bitterness now. Accepting a quiet retirement abroad. He picked up one of the newspapers. She'll have enough to live on, but her days of control are over. Ruby appeared in the doorway, waving a thick envelope. The Culinary School Board reviewed Annie's case. They're not just reinstating your acceptance. They want you to teach a heritage cooking course. Annie's eyes filled with tears as she read the letter. In Paris? And they want your grandmother's recipes included in the curriculum, Ruby added with a smile. I touched the recipe card on the counter, its edges soft with age and use. They belong to everyone now. No more hiding them away. Speaking of no more hiding, our father pulled out an old photo album. I found this in the summer house foundation. Your grandmother left it there, along with this. He handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in her familiar script. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dearest Madeline, if you're reading this, you've discovered the truth. But remember, legacy isn't just about exposing lies. It's about choosing which truths to preserve, which recipes to pass on. Some ingredients are better left unmeasured. Love, Grandma. The doorbell rang. Ethan entered with a stack of documents. The board approved everything. The family foundation is being restructured, with both of you as trustees. And the summer house? Annie asked. Being converted into a cooking school, I said, where students can learn the real traditions, the authentic recipes. Our father touched the recipe card gently. Your mother wasn't entirely wrong, you know. Some things do need to evolve, but not at the cost of their soul. A noise from the driveway drew us to the window. Our mother stood at the gate, ignoring the reporters as she stared up at the house. For a moment, I saw something in her face, not regret exactly, but recognition of what she'd lost, what she'd traded for power. She placed something on the gatepost, a small wrapped package, then walked away without looking back. Later, we found it contained her own grandmother's recipe book, filled with notes and variations we'd never seen. On the final page, she'd written, "Some legacies deserve to survive, even if their keepers don't." Annie began copying the recipe for tomorrow's paper, her new weekly column celebrating family cooking traditions. But she paused, looking up at me. Do you think we'll ever understand why she did it all? Maybe that's not the point, I said, watching the sunset paint the kitchen in familiar golden hues. Maybe it's about understanding ourselves. The oven timer chimed. As Annie pulled out the final batch of tarts, their scent filled the kitchen with memories, not just of our grandmother, but of all the complicated ingredients that made up our family's story. I picked up one of the tarts, still warm. Its surface wasn't perfect like our mother had always demanded. Instead, it was beautifully, authentically imperfect, like truth, like family, like love. The recipe card sat between us, its measurements both precise and forgiving. Some traditions didn't need to be changed. They just needed to be understood, preserved not in spite of their flaws, but because of them. Outside, the reporters finally began to leave, but we stayed in the kitchen, surrounded by the sweet evidence of our grandmother's real legacy, not the one written in wills or locked in boxes, but the one baked into every moment we chose truth over power, love over control, forgiveness over perfection.
When I got married, my mother-in-law said, "I can't comprehend why you're still working." Gary's mother scoffed, her disdain clear as day. A woman's place is at home with her children. Gary, my husband, never defended me. He'd always dismiss their derogatory remarks, advising me to just ignore them. But their words were like relentless needles, chipping away at my self-esteem. With my mother gone and my marriage crumbling, resentment towards Gary grew. He had never truly stood by me, leaving me to fend for myself against his parents' criticism and never siding with me. I remember being pregnant with Amanda and hearing his parents express their hope for a grandson. Their disappointment was unmistakable when she was born. "Next time, make sure it's a boy," they had remarked, barely hiding their dissatisfaction. It was heartbreaking to see my daughter subjected to such blatant favoritism. Now, Gary wanted to use my inheritance to move closer to his parents, to immerse us further into their toxic environment. The thought infuriated me. I couldn't and wouldn't let that happen. As I sat in the quiet surrounded by reminders of my mother, a plan began to form in my mind. I refused to be bullied into submission. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for my children too. Gary had shown his true colors, and it was time for him to face the consequences. Over the next few days, I gathered documents and prepared for a legal battle. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Miss Kathleen, assured me we had a strong case. "Don't worry, Denise," she said confidently. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for this war. I would stand my ground for the sake of my dignity and for the future of my children, no longer the passive observer of my own life. I'll make sure the inheritance stays right where it belongs, I declared, a confident smile breaking across my face. One evening, while sorting through my mother's items, I discovered an old, dusty envelope hidden in a drawer. Inside, a treasure trove of stock certificates and property deeds revealed themselves. My hands shook as I grasped the magnitude of my mother's secret financial accumulations. The stocks and properties combined were worth a staggering $6 million. I was in disbelief. My mother had lived such a modest life, yet here she was, sitting on a small fortune. She had been incredibly frugal, but I had no idea she had saved so much. An accompanying note, written in her neat, careful handwriting, read, "Denise, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it gives you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely." Tears filled my eyes as her foresight and love enveloped me, a comforting embrace from beyond the grave. Determined to set things straight with Gary about his intentions for my inheritance, I confronted him the next day. He was in the living room, idly flipping through a magazine. "Gary, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm. He glanced up, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "What is it now, Denise?" "I found something my mother left behind," I started, holding up the envelope. "It turns out she left me stocks and properties worth $6 million. Gary's eyes widened, a clear mix of shock and greed flashing across his face. $6 million? "That's great news," he exclaimed, his tone unnervingly enthusiastic. "Don't get any ideas, Gary. This money is mine," I asserted firmly, disgusted by his reaction. My resolve was clear. This inheritance was a testament to my mother's love and foresight, and I was not about to let Gary squander it. I was prepared to protect it at all costs, ensuring it would be used as she intended, to provide a better life for me and my children. "And the kids, you won't see a cent of it," I stated, watching as Gary's expression darkened. "You can't just keep it all to yourself, Denise. We're married. What's yours is mine," he snapped back. A surge of anger welled up inside me. "You've shown your true colors, Gary. You don't care about me or the kids. All you see are dollar signs," I accused him. Gary stood abruptly, his face flushing with fury. "You're being selfish, Denise." "I'm thinking about our future, about our family's future," he argued. "What family, Gary? The one you're willing to sell out for your gains?" I retorted sharply. He advanced towards me, fists clenched. "You'll regret this, Denise." "I'll make sure of it," he threatened. I stood firm, unwavering. "Bring it on, Gary. I'm not afraid of you anymore." With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me to gather my thoughts. I knew this was only the beginning of what would be a long and bitter dispute, but I was prepared to fight for my children, for my mother's legacy, and myself. The following week was a blur of legal consultations and tense silences at home. Gary's demeanor had shifted from shock to a cold, calculated aggression. He was like a caged animal, desperate and dangerous. One evening, after the kids were asleep, Gary cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were wild, his posture menacing. "You think you're clever, Denise? Hiding that money from me?" he accused harshly. I leaned back against the counter, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "It's not about being clever, Gary. It's about doing what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your delusional fantasies," I asserted. He slammed his fist onto the countertop, making me flinch. "I am your husband. I have rights to that money," he claimed aggressively. His words were venomous, but I cut him off. "A what, Gary? A woman who won't bow down to your greed and bullying," I challenged, his face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure you don't get a dime of that money." His threatening tone was palpable, and I could feel the looming danger, but my resolve was stronger than ever. I was determined to stand my ground and protect what my mother entrusted me. I refused to show fear. "Is that a threat, Gary?" I demanded as he leaned in close, his breath sour with malice. "It's a promise," he hissed. I pushed past him, my body coursing with adrenaline. "We'll see about that. The court will decide," I declared, striding away while his venomous words echoed behind me. "You're going to be left with nothing, Denise. Nothing." The following day, I received a call from my lawyer. "Denise, Gary has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance," she informed me. Taking a deep breath, I felt fear and fierce determination surge within me. "Let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way," I replied. Miss Kathleen's voice was resolute. "We have a strong case, Denise. Don't worry, we'll make sure justice is served." As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts turned to my children sleeping peacefully in their rooms. This battle wasn't just for me. It was for their future. Gary had become a stranger, a man driven by greed and spite, but I was no longer the woman he thought he could bully and intimidate. As I drifted towards sleep, I envisioned the courtroom, the judge, and myself standing tall and fighting not just for the inheritance but for my dignity, my children's future, and the quiet strength my mother had always shown. This was my fight, and I was ready. The legal battle that followed was grueling. Gary's strategy was clear: portray me as an uncooperative wife who was hoarding the family's resources. However, his arguments were weak, rooted more in desperation than in legal substance. During a mediation session, a final effort to settle before our court hearing, Gary sat across from me, his lawyer by his side. His gaze was cold, his demeanor confident to the point of arrogance. "Let's be reasonable, Denise," his lawyer started. "Gary is entitled to a portion of this inheritance. It's only fair." I glanced at Miss Kathleen, my resolve unyielding. "Fair? Gary has not contributed to this inheritance. It is solely from my late mother, intended for me and my children," I stated firmly. Gary's claim to my inheritance was not just a legal challenge, but a moral one. I was determined to protect what my mother had painstakingly saved, not just for her peace of mind, but for the security and well-being of her grandchildren. This inheritance was more than just money. It was a legacy, and I would defend it with everything I had. Gary leaned forward, his tone scornful. "Come on, Denise. You're just being spiteful. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a share?" I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "This isn't about spite, Gary. It's about justice. You've never truly considered what the kids need. This is about your greed," I replied sharply. His lawyer began to interject, but Gary gestured for him to stop. "You think you can just take everything, don't you, Denise? Play the grieving daughter and the victimized wife," he accused. I met his gaze squarely, my voice steady. "This isn't a game, Gary. You're the one trying to take what isn't yours." The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, tried to bring order. "Let's try to remain civil. This is about finding a resolution." Gary cut her off, his voice rising with frustration. "A resolution? She's the one being unreasonable." The tension in the room was palpable, thick and suffocating. Yet I spoke calmly, yet firmly. "I am being perfectly reasonable. I'm protecting what my mother intended for her grandchildren. Gary's claims are baseless." Sensing the discussion was going nowhere, the mediator called for a break. As we stood, Gary leaned close, his breath hot on my ear. "You'll pay for this, Denise. I'll make sure of it." I walked out of the room, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Gary's threats were empty, his case was weak. I knew the law was on my side, and I was determined to see this through to the end. In the weeks that followed, I dove into legal documents, met regularly with Miss Kathleen, and prepared for the courtroom battle. The children stayed with my sister, shielded from the worst of the conflict. I missed them terribly, but I knew this fight was as much for their future as it was for mine. The day of the hearing finally arrived. Standing in the courtroom, I braced myself to face Gary and counter whatever deceptive narrative he planned to present. This was the moment of truth, and I was ready to stand up for what was right, for the legacy my mother had left behind, and for the future of my children. I was resolute, prepared to channel every ounce of my strength into the battle ahead. The courtroom transformed into a battleground, where words served as weapons and Gary's attorney spun a narrative of a wronged husband unjustly deprived of his rightful share. Yet, under Miss Kathleen's deft cross-examination, his arguments crumbled like a fragile house of cards. During a recess, Gary confronted me in the hallway, his face contorted with fury. "You're ruining everything, Denise. You think you're going to walk away with all that money? Despite the fear clawing at my insides, I stood firm. It's not your money, Gary. It never was, I asserted. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I'll drag this out as long as it takes. I'll bleed you dry with legal fees. Meeting his gaze, my voice steady and unwavering, I replied, do what you must. I won't let you bully me into submission. As we returned to the courtroom, a newfound sense of empowerment surged through me. Gary's threats seemed hollow, his bravado nothing more than a mask for his desperation. The final verdict brought vindication. The judge ruled in my favor, recognizing the inheritance as solely my property. Gary's expression, as the judgment was delivered, was one of utter defeat. However, the victory was tinged with bitterness. I had won the legal battle, but at the expense of my marriage. The family I once knew was now shattered. In the weeks that followed, Gary's life began to unravel. His reputation, once built on intimidation, now crumbled as the community saw him for the greedy man he was, who had tried to claim his wife's inheritance. Word of Gary's misfortunes reached me, detailing his rapid decline, his job gone, his friends distanced, and his reputation in tatters. His fall from grace was sharp, and although I couldn't truly feel pleased about it, there was an undeniable sense of poetic justice to his fate. One evening, a phone call interrupted my thoughts. It was a mutual friend. Denise, have you heard the latest about Gary? I paused for a moment. No, what happened? He's leaving town. He's lost his job and his house. He's pretty much destitute. A complex emotion stirred within me. Not quite satisfaction, but something akin to it. Gary had sown seeds of destruction in his quest against me, but ultimately, he was the one who unraveled. After hanging up the phone, I gazed at the picture of my children on the mantel. This struggle had been for them, for their future and their security. That night, as I tucked them into bed, a deep sense of peace washed over me. The battle was over, and we had come out stronger, free from Gary's shadow, and ready to embark on a new chapter. Our lives would be different, but we would be okay. We were together, and that was all that mattered. In the months following the court ruling, life gradually found a new rhythm. The court victory brought me closure, but it also marked the beginning of a new journey, one of healing and rebuilding. I decided to sell our old house, which held too many bitter memories. Each item I packed away was a step further from my past with Gary. I was committed to forging a better future for Amanda and Andrew. One day, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a photo of Gary and me during happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought we had, for the love I once believed was real. But as I looked at his smiling face in the photo, I realized the man I had married no longer existed. He had shown his true colors, and they were dark and unpleasant. With a decisive movement, I tossed the photo into the trash bin, a symbolic act of letting go. Moving to a new town offered a fresh start. I found a cozy home in a welcoming neighborhood, and the kids enrolled in a new school, quickly making friends. I immersed myself more in my writing, finding solace in the worlds I created with my words. One evening, as I was tucking Amanda into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and asked, "Mom, do you miss Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes I miss who I thought your dad was," I admitted softly. "But we're better off now." It was true. Despite everything, we had found a way to move forward, stronger and more united than ever. "We're a strong team, just the three of us," I said, and she nodded, a mature look in her young eyes. "I like it here, Mom. I like our new home," she told me. Her words warmed my heart. We had come a long way. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts turned to Gary's downfall. His greed and malice had ultimately backfired, leaving him with nothing. While I found no joy in his misfortune, there was a definite sense of justice in the outcome. The kids and I faced a long road ahead, but we were on a path to healing. The inheritance, now securely invested, would provide for their education and our future needs. I closed my eyes, thinking of my mother. Her strength and foresight had been our salvation. In her wisdom, she had given me the means to protect myself and my children. Drifting off to sleep, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm that had once threatened to uproot our lives had passed, leaving clarity and hope in its wake. We had weathered the worst, and now, with a new day dawning, it felt like anything was possible. It was a regular Thursday evening at our home, located just on the fringes of a bustling city. John and I were sinking into our usual evening rituals, he with a beer in hand, relaxing on the sofa after a demanding day at his auto repair shop, and I, Virginia, absorbed in my laptop, keenly observing the latest trends in stocks and cryptocurrencies. Our quaint, two-story house, once chosen for its potential to nurture a future family, now seemed like a battlefield marking our diverging paths. "So, how is the market today?" John inquired, his voice casual but tinged with an undertone of tension that had become all too familiar. "Usual fluctuations, but cryptocurrencies seem promising," I responded, trying to maintain harmony. John let out a dismissive chuckle and set his beer down a bit forcefully. "Crypto again? You know, not everything that shines is gold, Virginia." I sighed and closed my laptop, bracing myself for the same old debate. "And not every car that rolls into your shop is worth fixing, yet you fix them because you see their value. Why can't you see the value in what I'm doing?" "Because cars are tangible, Virginia. You can touch them, fix them, sell them. What you're doing, throwing our money into the wind, hoping it flies back with more, it's just reckless." Frustration bubbled up within me, the repetitive argument wearing thin. "It's not reckless, John. It's calculated. There's a big difference between gambling and investing. I wish you'd try to understand that." John stood and began pacing. "Calculated? You call putting our hard-earned money into something as unstable as cryptocurrency calculated?" "Yes, I do, because I don't jump in blindly. I research, I study trends, and I make informed decisions. It's no different from what you do with your shop." "My shop is a sure thing, Virginia. People always need car repairs. But this? It's just a phase. What happens when it crashes? What then? We could lose everything. John, we could lose money in any investment. The shop could falter too. Nothing's guaranteed. But haven't we seen good returns on my investments? Isn't that worth something?" He stopped pacing and ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's not just about the money, Virginia. It's about security, about not risking everything on a gamble. Why can't we invest more in the shop and expand it? That's a tangible way to grow our money. And put all our eggs in one basket? What if something happens to the shop, John? Diversification is key. That's investing 202. He shook his head, the distance between our views as wide as ever. "Diversification, sure, but into something stable. This digital fairy dust." Standing now, driven by a need to defend my choices and independence, I retorted, "You know, for someone who runs his own business, you're surprisingly closed-minded. And you're surprisingly stubborn," he countered. "All I'm saying is we could be using that money to build something lasting, something we can actually see and touch." As usual, our conversation was going in circles. "Let's just agree to disagree, okay? I won't comment on how you run your shop and you don't critique my investments," I suggested, hoping to find some middle ground. John exhaled deeply, the fight leaving him. "Fine, but just remember, Virginia, if all this blows up, don't say I didn't warn you." The tension between John and me wasn't the only strain in our lives. His family dynamics added another layer of complexity. Living close to his parents and sister meant frequent interactions, each a reminder of our different views on family and responsibility. It was on a Sunday afternoon when John suggested we visit his parents. Just the thought made my stomach turn. It wasn't his parents I was wary of, it was Carol, John's sister, whose lifestyle baffled me. "Come on, Virginia. It's been ages since we last saw them. Mom's been asking about you, and you know Dad is dealing with cancer," John pressed, noting my hesitation. "Yeah, I bet Carol's missed me too," I muttered, my sarcasm clear. "Look, I know you two don't see eye to eye, but can't you just try?" "For me," he pleaded. Sighing, I agreed. "Fine, but I'm not staying if she starts bragging about shopping sprees." When we arrived, Carol was already there, flaunting her latest designer bag, her air of superiority as pungent as perfume. "Look at this, just got it yesterday. Isn't it fabulous?" she gushed, barely acknowledging us. "It's something," I managed to say, biting my tongue. John's mother, oblivious to the tension, ushered us in. "Virginia, dear, so glad you could make it. You two should visit more often." The afternoon dragged on with Carol dominating the conversation with tales of her latest vacations and shopping exploits. I maintained a neutral expression, engaging minimally, but my patience thinned. "So, Virginia, still playing with your stocks and bits?" Carol sneered, her tone dripping with disdain. "It's called investing, Carol. Maybe you should try it sometime instead of wasting money on things you don't need." I snapped back, my annoyance breaking through. John gave me a warning look, but it was too late. Carol scoffed. "Investing? Please, like gambling on the internet is something to brag about. At least when I spend my money, I have something to show for it. Something to show until it goes out of fashion next season," I retorted, unable to hold back. "That's enough, both of you," John's father interjected sternly. "We're here to enjoy each other's company, not to argue about whatever this is." The rest of the visit passed in uncomfortable silence. As we left, John couldn't hide his frustration. "Virginia, why do you have to provoke her? Can't you just let it go for one afternoon?" "I provoke her?" She started it with her snide remarks. "I'm just not going to sit there and take it, John. Sometimes, I wish you'd try a little harder for peace." "Try harder, John? I'm not the one splurging on luxuries," I countered, feeling both defiant and drained from the day's events. The tension in the room was palpable as Carol continued to flaunt her latest extravagances, seemingly oblivious to how it affected everyone around her. It baffled me why no one confronted her about her overindulgent behavior. John noticed my frustration and offered an explanation. "She's family, Virginia. We support each other, even if we don't always approve of their choices." I countered, feeling the need to highlight the distinction. Supporting someone and enabling their poor choices are two different things, John. Someone needs to set boundaries for her. He sighed deeply, the weight of the situation visible in his expression. "I get it, but changing her isn't in our hands. She's set in her ways, and Mom and Dad aren't about to start challenging her now." "But what about us, John? How are we expected to build our future with your family's constant financial demands?" I questioned, worried about our stability. "We'll manage, Virginia. We always find a way," he reassured me, though his voice lacked conviction. The somber news of Mr. Nathan's passing came as a shock. The whole family was thrown from planning treatment options to mourning his loss. During our grief, Carol took the reins on the funeral arrangements and soon after dropped a bombshell about the cost. John looked troubled as he broke the news in our living room. "Virginia, Carol's planned a funeral that costs $90,000. She expects us to cover half." I was stunned. $90,000? "John, that's excessive. Are we funding a funeral or staging a spectacle?" He frowned, his tone serious. "This isn't the time to argue about money, Virginia. It's about honoring my father in the way he deserves." "But surely there must be a mistake with that amount." "It's just too much," I persisted, struggling to understand the exorbitant figure. John's frustration boiled over. "My father has just passed away, and you're here bickering about the expense? That's insensitive, Virginia." "I'm not bickering. I'm genuinely shocked. We've never considered spending that much even on major personal expenses," I explained, hoping he would see my point. John abruptly stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't need this right now. I don't need you questioning the cost of my father's funeral. If you can't see beyond the numbers for once, perhaps you shouldn't be involved." I bit back my initial retort, recognizing his pain. "I'm sorry, John. I'll make sure the $45,000 is sent to Carol. I just need a moment to process all of this," I said softly, conceding to keep the peace. John paced agitatedly, his usual calm demeanor unraveled by grief. "It's not just about the money, Virginia. It's about doing the right thing for him. And if that means paying whatever it takes, then we will." His words echoed in the tense air. a reminder of the complex interplay of family loyalty and financial responsibility. When I informed John about sending the funds to Carol, he barely responded, absorbed in his deep sorrow and frustration. The space between us in our living room felt more like miles than mere feet. Stepping into the funeral home, the enormity of recent events weighed heavily on me. The last several days had been a chaotic blend of sadness and confusion, yet nothing had prepared me for the revelation that awaited me there. Upon reaching the reception desk, I steadied my voice and said, "I'm here for Mr. Nathan's funeral." The woman behind the counter looked up, her face filled with regret. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're too late. Mr. Nathan was cremated yesterday." My heart sank. "Excuse me? I was told the funeral was today." Her expression softened as she replied, "The family decided to reschedule." "I'm deeply sorry for the mix-up and your loss." Rooted to the spot, bewildered and upset, I wondered how John could have failed to inform me. Outraged, I quickly called him, my fingers shaking with disbelief and anger. "John, why didn't you tell me the funeral date was changed?" "I just showed up like a fool, only to discover I missed it all," I exclaimed. John's voice was cold and distant. "I didn't think you'd care, Virginia. You've only been fussing over the expenses and questioning every decision. I didn't see why you'd want to tend. Because he was my father-in-law, because I am your wife. How could you just cut me out?" I responded, my voice cracking under the strain of hurt and anger. "Perhaps not for much longer," he retorted, his voice filled with acrimony. "What are you implying?" I demanded, my heart plummeting. "I'm done, Virginia. I can't continue this way. You seem more concerned with your investments than our family. The divorce papers are ready." His words struck me sharply, as if I had been slapped. "Divorce?" Surely, he wasn't serious. "This can't be happening, John. Over this? We can discuss it. We can resolve things," I pleaded. "No, Virginia, it's too late. I'm putting the house on the market. We'll split everything and part ways," he declared. I was left speechless, barely comprehending as I stumbled back to the parking lot, where I saw Carol pulling up in a shiny new luxury car. My anger surged anew. "Nice car, Carol. How did you afford this?" "Inheritance," she responded nonchalantly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she casually tossed her hair. "Yes, Dad left me a little something." Her flippant reference to her father, the shopping bags in her hands, and her apparent lack of grief infuriated me. "A little something, huh? Seems mourning has its perks." Carol's smile turned to a smirk. "Everyone grieves differently, Virginia. Some of us invest in stocks, others in cars." I clenched my fists, feeling the injustice burn within me. As my relationship with John crumbled, here was Carol, apparently thriving amidst the upheaval. "Enjoy your car, Carol. It must have cost a pretty penny, or should I say a pretty dollar?" Her laugh rang hollow, reverberating in the empty parking lot as she walked away. The man I loved was distancing himself from me, and the family I had tried to embrace was showing their true colors. In the days that followed, each moment was shrouded in a fog of disbelief and betrayal. The weight of the divorce papers in my purse felt like a constant, heavy reminder of my marriage falling apart. Seeing Carol's brand new luxury car sparked a suspicion that I couldn't dismiss. Compelled to uncover the truth, I decided to visit the funeral home where Mr. Nathan's services were arranged. With a mix of determination and suspicion fueling me, I entered the funeral home. The place had an eerie quietness, fitting its somber purpose. At the reception desk, I was surprised to see Michelle, a high school classmate who seemed like the last person to end up working at a funeral home. "Michelle," I called out, louder than intended for such a solemn place. "I had no idea you worked here." Her head snapped up, and after a brief moment of surprise, recognition dawned on her face. "Virginia? Wow, it's been ages. What brings you here? Anything I can help with?" Taking a deep breath, I braced myself for the conversation ahead. "Actually, yes. It's about my father-in-law's funeral. I heard it was arranged here." Michelle's demeanor shifted to professional, yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. "Sure, let me pull up the details." As she typed, I fidgeted. the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on me. When Michelle located the record, her eyebrows knit together in concern. Okay, here it is. The service was straightforward, just a cremation kept simple. The total came to $9,000. My heart dropped. $9,000? But we were told it cost $90,000. We believed that was the price. Michelle paused, her expression turning serious. That's a huge difference. It was Carol who handled the arrangements, right? Everything here was billed at $9,000, nothing more. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture I was reluctant to see. Can you print me a copy of that bill? I need proof. Sure thing, Michelle said, her tone sympathetic. She quickly printed a duplicate of the receipt and handed it to me. Holding the paper felt like grasping a piece of the puzzle that would unravel a larger deception. Thanks, Michelle. I've got to sort this out. Armed with the printout, my next step was confronting the family, particularly Carol. The drive to my mother-in-law's house was heavy with anticipation. They were likely gathered there, discussing the estate and the funeral's aftermath. My stomach churned with a mix of dread and determination. Upon arrival, the house was unsettlingly quiet. I hesitated at the door, gathering my courage before stepping inside. My footsteps echoed through the hallway, heralding my presence. In the living room, John, Carol, and my mother-in-law sat together, looking like a serene family portrait about to be disrupted. My mother-in-law, her eyes shadowed with sorrow, spoke first. "Dear, we missed you at the funeral yesterday. We thought you'd be there." Taking a deep breath, I responded, "I was told it was today." "I'm truly sorry for your loss," my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I then turned to John. "Can we talk privately? I hope to avoid causing any more distress." John's response sliced through the tense air. "No secrets here. You're not part of this family anymore, remembers?" His words stung sharply, cutting deeper than I expected. Despite the shock and chaos unfolding around me, I persisted, pulling out the printed receipt from the funeral home. "Then explain this to me," I demanded, my voice firm as I presented the evidence. "The funeral cost $9,000, not the $90,000 Carol claimed. Where did the rest of the money go?" John looked genuinely shocked, his gaze flickering between the receipt and Carol. "What's this about, Carol?" he asked, his tone a mix of confusion and betrayal. Under our scrutinizing eyes, Carol squirmed uncomfortably. After a moment of silence, she admitted in a small voice, "I needed the money." The room fell silent, the weight of her confession hanging heavily in the air. John's mother, overhearing the conversation, chimed in with a disappointed tone. "Your father saved diligently for his farewell. I even gave Carol an extra $20,000 to cover everything fully." I did the quick math aloud, and the tension in the room escalated. $110,000 in total, and only $9,000 spent. "Carol, where's the rest?" Flustered, Carol confessed to splurging the money on a new car for herself, avoiding eye contact as her gaze darted away. I expected John to react with anger or disappointment, but instead, he responded almost tenderly. "You shouldn't have done that. Be more careful next time."
His response astounded me.
"Careful? She committed fraud, John. And you're okay with that?" John's justification was dismissive and infuriating. "You wouldn't understand. You've got no family. You don't get what it means to stick together." That was the last straw for me. In front of everyone, I signed the divorce papers with a decisive flourish. "Carol, you owe me $45,000. Pay up, or I'm going to the police." John's protests followed me as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. I had seen and heard enough. The betrayal was complete, and so was my resolve to move forward. As I walked away, the finality of my actions settled in. There was no going back, only forward, away from the lies and deceit that had tainted what I once thought of as family. Packing up my life into boxes felt surreal, as if I were an observer in my own story. The "for sale" sign outside the house stood as a stark reminder of the finality of it all. By afternoon, I was settling into a small apartment that felt more like a fresh start than a downgrade. That evening, while I was sorting through remnants of my past life, my phone rang. John's name flashed on the screen, a name I no longer felt connected to. Driven by curiosity, I answered. Virginia, you need to back off, Carol. John's voice came through, tinged with uncharacteristic harshness. Back off. I laughed, cold and sharp. Not a chance, John. She took it from me, and I want it back. Your sister is a thief. John was silent for a moment.
She's family.
You wouldn't understand family, he finally said.
That ship has sailed, John.
As far as I'm concerned, you and your sister are just people I used to know. He tried to argue, but I cut him off. Save it. Carol has 3 weeks to return my money, or I'm pressing charges. And you? Stay out of it. You're nothing to me now. Hanging up, I felt a mix of sadness and liberation. The man I once loved was now just another obstacle on my path to reclaiming my life. 3 weeks later, a knock at my door heralded the return of my $45,000. Carol stood there, her posture defiant, a sneer playing on her lips. Here's your money, she spat, thrusting an envelope into my hands. Happy now, you money-grubbing witch. I took the envelope, my gaze steady. It's not about the money, Carol. It's about principle, about not letting you walk all over people. She laughed hollowly, bitter. Whatever helps you sleep at night. As she turned to leave, I called out, just remember, Carol, karma's a real pain. What goes around comes around. Closing the door, I felt a profound sense of closure, ready to move forward without looking back. Leaning against the wall, I held the envelope, feeling its weight in my hand. The money was a minor victory, but the real triumph was standing up for myself, refusing to be a victim of their greed and deception. Life had settled into a new, calmer, and more predictable rhythm when unexpectedly, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in a long time. It was John, a voice from a past I had meticulously tucked away. Hey, I need a favor. A big one. John's voice sounded worn, more than I remembered. I hesitated, thrown off by the suddenness of his call. A favor, John? We're past that, don't you think? I replied. It's Carol. She's in deep trouble this time. Debt's up to her eyeballs, and the wolves are at the door. We've sold everything, the house, the shop. It's still not enough, he explained. His words took a moment to sink in. And you're calling me why? I'm not part of the circus anymore, John, I responded. He sighed, a sound dripping with desperation. Come on, don't be like that. You got out and made it big with your trading. Can you spare something, for old time's sake? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, he still saw me as a lifeline for their mess. Spare something for her, after she nearly ruined us with her lies? You've got some nerve, John. It's not just for her. It's for all of us. You wouldn't be where you are without me. Don't forget that, he countered, his voice laced with bitterness. A sharp, short laugh escaped me. Where I am is despite you, not because of you. To think I owe you, that's rich. There was silence on the line, heavy and uncomfortable. So that's it then? You're going to turn your back on us? He finally said. There is no us, John. There hasn't been for a long time. And as for turning my back, I think you've got me confused with someone who still cares, I said firmly. Hanging up, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, yes, but also relief. That chapter of my life was truly closed now. Sitting in the living room of my new house, a place I had earned with my hard work and smarts, I realized just how far I had come. This was my sanctuary, built not on the shaky grounds of deceit and manipulation, but on my resilience and hard work. Here, in this space, I had found peace and a testament to my independence and strength. My name is Tiffany, and my life has unexpectedly turned into an exhilarating journey. It all began during my time as a perfume sales manager at a luxurious department store. One day, a tall, handsome man entered the store, looking quite anxious as he toyed with his phone while heading to the counter. Hi, he uttered nervously. I need help picking out a perfume for my mom. His sincere concern for his mother's happiness was charming. I'll make sure we find the perfect scent, I assured him, and we started exploring some of the popular fragrances. His name was Jeffrey, a 32-year-old who worked for his family's construction business and lived close by. We hit it off quickly, chatting effortlessly. I was drawn to his warm brown eyes and timid smile. After nearly an hour, we chose a sophisticated floral perfume. As I packaged the perfume, Jeffrey hesitated before asking, "Tiffany, would you like to go for coffee sometime?" My heart fluttered. "I'd love to," I replied, managing to keep my voice calm. That coffee date blossomed into dinner and more outings together. Jeffrey was sweet and thoughtful and always made me laugh. We enjoyed similar pastimes like watching movies, hiking, and dining out. Before long, we were a couple, and everything seemed perfect until I met his mother, Sandra. Jeffrey had hinted that his mother was somewhat overbearing, but I was unprepared for her formidable presence. We met at an upscale restaurant where Sandra sat at the head of the table, eyeing me critically as we approached. Dressed impeccably with her hair in a tight bun, she greeted me coldly and barely acknowledged my handshake. "So, you're the girl Jeffrey's dating," she remarked icily. As dinner progressed, Sandra quizzed me sharply. "Where did you say you work, Tiffany?" She interrupted as I began to answer. "A perfume sales manager at retail? How quaint," she scoffed, and then inquired about my family. When I mentioned my parents were teachers, she remarked, "Well, I suppose someone has to do it," continuing to make snide remarks throughout the evening. Jeffrey offered silent support, squeezing my hand, yet said nothing in my defense. After dinner, Sandra pulled me aside. "Listen carefully, Tiffany. I run this family. I decide what's best for my sons. If you want a future with Jeffrey, you'll need to prove your worth," she whispered sharply. Stunned, I couldn't respond. When Jeffrey proposed, I was ecstatic. But that joy was soon overshadowed by Sandra's domination of our wedding plans. She dictated every detail, from the venue to the guest list. I tried to assert my ideas, but was swiftly dismissed. "Those are nice, dear, but let's leave this to the professional," she insisted. Jeffrey, pleading with his eyes, whispered, "Just go along with it, it's easier this way." So, I watched helplessly as my dream wedding morphed into Sandra's grand vision. Despite this, I remained hopeful that things would change once we were married and living independently. The first few months of our marriage were a whirlwind of joy as Jeffrey and I settled into our new apartment, embracing the thrill of creating our own space together. Despite the excitement of setting up our new apartment, Sandra's influence was impossible to ignore. She would often visit unannounced while Jeffrey was at work, ostensibly just to check in. As she critiqued our living room layout, "Oh, dear, is this how you've arranged it? Let me show you a better way." I would clench my teeth and force a smile, trying to see her intrusions as well-intentioned, even though they felt more like encroachments on our privacy. One evening, as Jeffrey and I enjoyed a quiet dinner, my phone broke the tranquility with a call from my boss. He offered me a promotion to senior sales manager, a role I had long aspired to. Thrilled, I shared the news with Jeffrey, who was equally happy for me. The next day, we found ourselves at Sandra's house for dinner. The tension was palpable. As she served what appeared to be a perfect roast, I could barely swallow, the meat tasting like sawdust. "Tiffany," Sandra began, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness, "Jeffrey tells me you've been offered a promotion." "How nice." "Yes, I'm very excited about it," I replied, striving to maintain my composure. Sandra's smile tightened. "Well, dear, I think it's time we discuss your real future. We need someone in sales, and with your experience, you'd be perfect." I took a deep breath. "Sandra, I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy in my current job. I don't want to leave it." The room's temperature seemed to drop. Sandra's eyes narrowed.
I see.
"So, you don't consider yourself part of this family, then?" Feeling my temper rise, I responded, "With all due respect, Sandra, you don't get to decide what's best for my marriage or career." Sandra stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "I think you need to reconsider your priorities, young lady. Jeffrey, talk some sense into your wife." With that, she stormed out. I turned to Jeffrey, expecting his support, but instead, he looked conflicted. "Tiffany, maybe we should think about this. Mom knows what she's doing." The drive home was silent, heavy with unspoken words and growing resentment. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that my struggle wasn't just with Sandra, it was with the entire family dynamic I had married into. Tension thickened with each passing day. One Sunday, at a family barbecue at Sandra's, I was in the kitchen preparing salads when I overheard Sandra on the patio. "It's such a shame," she announced loudly. "I remember Brian's ex-wife. She was just as ungrateful as Tiffany. But I showed her the door, kicked her out of this family myself." My cheeks burned. Brian, Jeffrey's older brother, looked uncomfortable. "Mom, please," he muttered, but Sandra pressed on. "I'm just saying, a woman should know her place. Isn't that right, Frank?" Jeffrey's father merely grunted, seldom opposing his wife. I couldn't bear it any longer. Marching out to the patio, salad bowl in hand, I confronted her. "Sandra, if you have something to say to me, why don't you say it to my face?" The backyard fell silent. Sandra's eyes narrowed.
Fine.
"You want to know what I think? I think you're not good enough for this family. You're stubborn, you're disrespectful, and you're pulling Jeffrey away from his responsibilities." Feeling as though I had been slapped, I retorted, "Responsibilities? You mean being your puppet?" Jeffrey pleaded, "Tiffany, please, let's not do this here." I spun around to face him. "And you, when are you going to stand up to her? When are you going to be a husband instead of a mama's boy?" The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Jeffrey's face crumpled, and Sandra looked triumphant. "You see," she crowed, "this is who you are. A spiteful, ungrateful girl who doesn't appreciate what she has." Tears welled up in my eyes. Without another word, I dashed into the house, grabbed my purse and keys, and drove away. The weeks following the barbecue incident were tense, as Jeffrey and I barely spoke, tiptoeing around each other in our own home. I immersed myself in work, often staying late at the office just to evade the oppressive quiet of our home. One evening, upon returning, I found Jeffrey waiting for me at the kitchen table, a grave look on his face.
"We need to talk," he began.
"Mom called today. She wants us to come over for her birthday dinner next week." My stomach knotted at the thought. "Jeffrey, I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "Please," he implored. "It would mean a lot to me. Maybe it's a chance to start over." Despite my urge to decline, to stop accommodating a woman who had no regard for me, the hopeful look in Jeffrey's eyes gave me pause. "Fine," I conceded, "but this is the last chance, Jeffrey. I mean it." The evening of Sandra's birthday arrived, and I stood at her door, my smile forced as we entered. Sandra greeted us with her customary superficial warmth. "Tiffany, dear," she cooed, air-kissing my cheek. "So glad you could make it. I was worried you might be too busy with your little job." I clenched my jaw, reminding myself to keep my composure. The dinner progressed with strained smiles and thinly veiled barbs. Sandra dominated the conversations, her sons and husband merely nodding in agreement. As the evening dragged on, Sandra decided it was time for the cake. "Tiffany, be a dear and bring out the cake. And don't forget the candles," she instructed. In the kitchen, I was thankful for a moment's respite. I carefully placed the candles on the cake, counting under my breath to ensure I had the right number. Back in the dining room, I presented the cake to Sandra. She scrutinized the candles, her voice sickly sweet. "Tiffany, there's one extra candle here. Can you even do a simple task correctly? Or perhaps you're trying to insinuate something about my age." "No, of course not," I began, but Sandra cut me off. "Enough," she snapped, starting to remove the candles. "Since you've ruined the design, you might as well see the mess you've made. Come closer, dear." Hesitantly, I leaned in, only to feel a hand thrust against the back of my head. Before I could react, my face was shoved into the cake. I struggled, gasping for air as frosting clogged my nose and mouth. After what seemed an eternity, Sandra released me. I stood up, coughing and wiping the cake from my eyes. The room fell silent except for Sandra's cruel laughter. "Oh dear, looks like someone's made a mess of themselves." Around me, guests awkwardly avoided eye contact, some emitting nervous chuckles. Jeffrey stared at the floor, his face flushed with embarrassment. Without a word, I fled to the bathroom, locking myself in as I scrubbed the cake off my face. I could hear muffled voices outside. A soft knock came at the door. "Tiffany, it's Jeffrey. Are you okay? Do you need help?" I flung the door open, fixing him with a glare. "Help? Now you want to help?" He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Mom can be a bit eccentric sometimes," he muttered. "We just need to." "Eccentric?" I hissed. "Jeffrey," she assaulted me, "and you just stood there." Without another word, I pushed past him, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from the evening's disaster. The days that followed were a blur of tears, arguments, and sleepless nights. Jeffrey tried to apologize, but his words felt empty. I threw myself even deeper into work, staying late at the office and taking on extra projects, trying to find some solace away from the turmoil at home. Even at work, I couldn't escape Sandra's influence. One afternoon, while I was assisting a customer, I heard a chillingly familiar voice that made my heart sink. "Excuse me, I'd like to speak to a manager," said the voice. I turned to see Sandra standing there, her eyes gleaming maliciously. Oblivious to her identity, my colleague directed her to me. "I'm the senior sales manager. How can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tension. Sandra's lips twisted into a vindictive smile. "I have a complaint about the perfume I purchased here last week. It smells like cheap chemicals, and when I tried to return it, your staff was incredibly rude to me." I knew her claims were false. Our store maintained rigorous quality control and a generous return policy, but before I could defend our practices, she escalated her tirade. "This is unacceptable. I demand to speak to your superior immediately." Alerted by the commotion, my manager approached. Sandra launched into her fabricated tale, depicting me as an incompetent manager who had personally sold her a defective product and then refused assistance. I tried to interject, to clarify the situation, but my manager silenced me with a gesture. "I'm very sorry for your experience, ma'am. Please come with me to my office. We'll sort this out immediately," he said. As they walked away, Sandra shot a triumphant look over her shoulder. I stood there, humiliated and fuming, as whispers circulated among my colleagues. An hour later, my manager summoned me. His expression was grim. "Tiffany, I've received multiple complaints about your performance recently, and after today's incident, I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go." I was stunned. "What?" "But those complaints, they're not real. It's my mother-in-law. She's trying to—" "Tiffany, please," he interrupted. "I understand you're going through some personal issues, but we can't have them affecting your work like this. I'm sorry, but my decision is final." I left the office in a daze, my personal belongings in a small box. Tears blurred my vision as I drove home. When I arrived, Jeffrey was there, his face filled with concern. "Tiffany, what happened?" "Your mother," I spat, "just cost me my job." I recounted the events of the day, my voice rising with each word. "And you want to know the worst part? She used our phone number to file those fake complaints." "Our phone number, Jeffrey, the one you gave her without asking me?" I locked myself in our bedroom, ignoring his pleas from the other side of the door. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was at a crossroads. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly under attack from Sandra and unsupported by my husband. The weeks following my job loss were some of the darkest I'd ever faced. One evening, as I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by job listings and unanswered applications, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I hear you're looking for work. Maybe it's time to reconsider my offer." Sandra, stunned, I wondered how she had gotten my new number, which I had changed specifically to avoid her. As if on cue, Jeffrey walked in. I held up my phone. "Did you give your mother my new number?" His hesitation said it all. "Look, maybe we should consider her offer. It's for us, for our future." Faced with this ultimate betrayal, I knew something had to change. This wasn't just about a job or an annoying relative. It was about my self-respect and our future together, both hanging by a thread. I pushed back my chair abruptly, the sound scraping loudly against the floor. "Our future, Jeffrey? There won't be a future if this continues. If things don't change soon, I don't know if I can stay in this marriage." The room fell into a stifling silence. Jeffrey appeared stunned, as if unable to grasp the weight of my words. Finally, he whispered, "I'll talk to her, I promise. Just give me some time." I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But I had heard similar promises before. Yet, what other choice did I have? I nodded silently, too disheartened to speak. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Waiting for Jeffrey to confront his mother was no longer an option. I needed to regain some semblance of independence, to remind myself of my strength. I contacted an old colleague who had recently started her own online perfume business. She was understanding of my situation and offered me a job as an online consultant. The pay wasn't much, but it was something, a lifeline amidst the turmoil. But Sandra's influence was far from over. As Christmas approached, so did the annual family gathering, a prospect I dreaded. It would be yet another stage for Sandra to belittle and humiliate me. The night before, Jeffrey and I argued again. He urged me to make more of an effort with his mother, to try and see things from her perspective. Her perspectives? I choked out incredulously. Jeffrey, her perspective is that I'm not good enough for this family, that I should quit my job and become her puppet. How am I supposed to empathize with that? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. She's set in her ways. If we could just... No, I interrupted firmly. I'm done trying. If you won't stand up for me, for us, then I'll have to do it myself. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. Tomorrow, at the Christmas gathering, I would confront Sandra once and for all. I was tired of being victimized, of letting her dictate my life. Christmas morning arrived with a heavy air of foreboding. We reached Sandra's house to find it bustling with activity. As we entered the living room, I felt Sandra's scrutinizing gaze. The room was already filled with family, Frank, Brian, and various aunts, uncles, and cousins. The afternoon was a blur of forced pleasantries and thinly veiled insults, with Sandra commanding every conversation. She kept steering the topic towards children, glancing at me each time. Finally, during dinner, she addressed me directly with a voice dripping with feigned concern. "Tiffany, dear, I couldn't help but notice you're not drinking. Any special reason?" Feeling my cheeks warm under the scrutiny, I replied, "No, Sandra, I'm just not in the mood for alcohol." Her eyes narrowed. Well, I do hope you're not having difficulties in that area. It's just, well, you're not getting any younger, and with your career struggles, I thought perhaps you'd be focusing on more important matters by now." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. More important matters? You mean like being a submissive wife who gives up her dreams to please her mother-in-law? Gasps echoed around the table. Sandra's face twisted with rage. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home?" "No, Sandra," I shot back, standing my ground. "How dare you treat me like this? I am your son's wife, not your punching bag. I've had enough of your manipulation and your cruelty." With those final words, I turned to leave, my resolve as strong as the silence I left behind. I found myself at a turning point as I left Sandra's chaotic Christmas gathering. The incident with the hot tea had been the final straw. In shock and pain, I drove directly to the hospital. The burns were minor, but the emotional scars ran deeper. After the doctors attended to me, I returned to an empty apartment, packed a few essentials, wrote a brief note to Jeffrey about needing some time away, and left. The next day, alone in a nondescript motel room, I reflected on everything while nursing my tender skin. As I mulled over my options, my phone unexpectedly rang. It was Frank, Jeffrey's father, sounding urgent and distressed. "Tiffany, can we talk?"
"It's important," he said.
Despite my reservations, I agreed, giving him the address of the motel. When Frank arrived, he looked worn and anxious, a stark contrast to the composed man I knew. He wasted no time. "Tiffany, I owe you an explanation about everything, starting with the company. Sandra's manipulations go deeper than you know," he began, his voice shaky. He explained that the business had originally belonged to his parents. When his father fell ill, Sandra deceived him into signing over control, appointing herself as the executive director. I was stunned. Why haven't you confronted her about this before?
I asked.
Tears welled up in Frank's eyes as he admitted his fears and cowardice. He pulled out a folder stuffed with documents, the evidence of Sandra's misdeeds. He spread the papers before me, revealing years of financial discrepancies, exploitation of undocumented workers, and negligent business practices. Sandra had been skirting laws, underpaying her staff, and silencing anyone who dared to challenge her authority. Among the documents was a police report involving Brian's ex-wife, who had nearly exposed Sandra's actions before suffering an accident that left her severely injured. Sandra had coerced Brian into ending his marriage to keep her silent. As I absorbed the information, my resolve hardened. This is monstrous, Frank. How could she get away with this for so long? I asked, my voice a mix of anger and disbelief. Frank's breakdown was complete as he confessed his regret for not acting sooner. I was terrified of her, of what she could do. But I can't let fear dictate my actions anymore, not after seeing what she's done to you. Together, we realized that it was not just my battle to fight, but a family ordeal that needed exposure and resolution. With the evidence in hand and a newfound ally in Frank, I prepared to confront Sandra, not just for myself, but for the sake of everyone she had hurt. Our next steps were uncertain, but our path was clear. It was time to bring Sandra's reign to an end. As I watched Frank break down, overwhelmed by a complex swirl of emotions, I felt a powerful mix of anger at Sandra's cruelty and greed, sympathy for Frank and all the exploited workers, and a growing resolve to end this injustice. Together, we decided to seek legal help and approached Brittany, a respected lawyer known for handling corporate fraud cases. Brittany listened intently to our story, and her concern deepened as we spoke. She agreed to represent us, without hesitation. It was a Tuesday afternoon when chaos erupted. My phone was bombarded with notifications, missed calls, text messages, and voicemails, all from Sandra. Bracing myself, I listened to one of the voicemails. Sandra's voice, shrill and furious, echoed through the speaker. "You ungrateful little witch. How dare you turn my husband against me? I'll ruin you for this, do you hear me? I'll destroy you." Her threats were relentless. When I blocked her number, she resorted to using others' phones to continue her tirade. But Sandra didn't stop at phone calls. She launched a full-scale character assassination campaign against me, reaching out to friends, family, and even my former coworkers, spinning a narrative that I had seduced Frank and turned him against her. The deepest cut came when Jeffrey sided with his mother. He confronted me at my new rented apartment, his face contorted with anger and betrayal. "How could you do this to us, to my mother?" he demanded. I attempted to show him the evidence, but he refused to listen. "I don't know who you are anymore," he spat before storming out. Reeling from Jeffrey's rejection, I received an unexpected call from Brian, Jeffrey's older brother. "Tiffany, it's Brian. I heard what's happening, and I want you to know I believe you, and I want to help." His support was a turning point. Brian provided additional evidence of Sandra's misdeeds and agreed to testify in court. He also helped us locate his ex-wife, Emma, whose testimony was crucial. She detailed the incident where Sandra had pushed her down the stairs and the subsequent threats and intimidation she had endured. As the trial date approached, Brittany worked tirelessly. She tracked down several undocumented workers Sandra had exploited. Despite their fear, many agreed to testify, their stories painting a horrifying picture of abuse and exploitation. The trial was intense. Sandra's lawyers fought fiercely, trying to discredit our witnesses and portray Frank and me as conspirators. However, Brittany was exceptional, systematically presenting our evidence and dismantling the defense's arguments. The turning point in the trial came when Brittany presented concrete evidence that Sandra had manipulated Frank's father into signing over the company. The judge listened intently as Brittany argued for the annulment of the will. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge ruled in our favor. The will was annulled, and ownership of the company was returned to Frank. Furthermore, the judge ordered a full investigation into the company's practices and Sandra's finances. As the gavel fell, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Frank sobbed with relief beside me, while Sandra's shrieks of outrage filled the courtroom. The aftermath of the trial brought sweeping changes. Once Frank regained control of the company, Jeffrey, true to his mother's influence, resigned from his position and ceased all communication with his father, unable to forgive what he perceived as a betrayal of his mother. Meanwhile, Frank found unexpected support in Brian, the father and eldest son, both having experienced Sandra's manipulation firsthand, formed a strong partnership, ready to rebuild and steer the company toward a more ethical and prosperous future. The task of restructuring the company was arduous, but Frank and Brian were determined to operate it ethically and efficiently. The legal battles didn't end with Sandra's trial. Frank, feeling liberated from Sandra's toxic influence, swiftly filed for divorce, a process expedited by her tarnished reputation. In the divorce settlement, he magnanimously left her the house they had shared for decades, a generous act given all that had transpired. A court-ordered audit of the company's finances unveiled years of creative accounting and tax evasion. The revelations were severe enough that Sandra was slapped with a massive fine and ordered to pay $820,000 in back taxes. The house, her last remaining asset, had to be sold to settle her debts with the tax authorities. Meanwhile, my marriage to Jeffrey crumbled beyond repair. His steadfast loyalty to his mother, despite the overwhelming evidence of her wrongdoings, was something I could neither comprehend nor accept. We filed for divorce, and signing the papers brought me a bittersweet mix of sadness and relief. As I pondered my future, Frank approached me with an unexpected proposition. "Tiffany," he said, his voice tinged with warmth and gratitude, "I know you've been through hell because of our family, but I want you to know that I still consider you family. We're rebuilding the sales department, and I'd like you to be a part of it. What do you say?" Touched by his offer, and after careful consideration, I accepted. Over the following months, I gradually found my footing in the construction business. Leveraging my experience in luxury retail, I mastered the art of selling everything from lumber to specialized tools. My background proved surprisingly valuable in handling high-end clients and custom projects. One day, during a routine shopping trip, I had an unexpected encounter. As I turned down the cereal aisle, I froze. There, just a few feet away, stood Jeffrey and Sandra. They looked worn and haggard, a stark contrast to their once polished appearance. Sandra's voice, shrill and angry, cut through the air. "You weak-willed idiot," she berated Jeffrey. "Can't you do anything right?" "Asked for the bran flakes, not this sugary garbage." Jeffrey, his shoulders slumped, muttered an apology and reached for another box. A pang of pity struck me as I witnessed how their toxic relationship had not only endured but seemed to have worsened. For a moment, I considered approaching them, but watching their dysfunctional interaction, I realized I had nothing to say. Instead, I quietly turned my cart around and left the store, leaving my shopping unfinished. It was a poignant reminder of the life I had left behind and the new path I had chosen, filled with hope and new beginnings. Hello, my name is Lisa. Last year marked a significant change in my life as I embraced my new status as a married woman and added a wedding band to my collection of accomplishments, which notably includes a series of victories in the courtroom where I thrive making persuasive arguments before judges. However, I didn't anticipate needing a tactical plan for family dinners. Let me paint you a picture of my family dynamics. My husband, Jerry, is incredibly close to his mother, and it's easy to see why. Mrs. Mary, his mother, is a formidable woman who single-handedly raised 3 children, a feat I deeply respect. Then there's Olivia, Jerry's sister, who seems to believe the world revolves around her. I recall the first time I stepped into their home, with Jerry proudly wrapping his arm around me, and I felt like a trophy on display. The living room was adorned with countless photos of Jerry and Olivia, creating a cozy yet intense atmosphere, reminiscent of a well-set movie scene where they've been acting out familial roles for years, and I was the new, unexpected character. Upon meeting me, Mrs. Mary offered a tight-lipped smile, the kind that's more obligatory than welcoming, as if she'd rather be anywhere else but there, possibly cleaning with my toothbrush. She was dressed in a floral outfit that screamed matriarchal authority. "Lisa, dear, Jerry has told us so much about you," she remarked, evaluating me as if I were a potential car purchase. "I've been looking forward to meeting you too, Mrs. Mary. Jerry has nothing but praise for you," I replied, trying to warm up the chilly atmosphere. Olivia quickly joined the conversation, eyeing me cautiously from the moment I entered. "So, Lisa, how's the lawyer life? I imagine it's just like on TV, making good money. So, how much do you make?" Her directness caught me off guard, and I choked a bit but managed to laugh it off, deflecting with, "Oh, it's a trade secret." Mrs. Mary then chimed in, pressing for a ballpark figure on my earnings, with Jerry giving me a pleading look to keep my composure. I countered playfully, if I had $1 for every time someone asked me that, I'd have enough to change the subject, and offered a disarming smile. Mrs. Mary snorted in response, saying, "Well, everyone knows what a teacher earns, right, Jerry? But now that you're practically family, sharing is caring." This was just the beginning of what felt like a subtle domestic Cold War. Within weeks, I found myself trying to replicate Mrs. Mary's famed chili recipe in our kitchen when she and Olivia would drop by unannounced, critiquing my cooking as if they were still the mistresses of the house. "Your child needs more heat," Mrs. Mary would say, barely tasting it, "and less salt. Watch your husband's blood pressure." I responded with a nod, while internally rolling my eyes so hard it felt like a brain exercise. Olivia leaned back casually, playing the aloof critic. "See this spot, Lisa? Cleanliness is next to godliness, isn't it, Mom?" Mrs. Mary would agree, treating her words like gospel. Olivia was likely congratulating herself internally as she pointed out a spot I had missed while cleaning. "Funny, I cleaned this place just this morning," I mentioned as I wiped the counter, showing her the missed spot. Meanwhile, Jerry was in the living room, probably engrossed in a video game or catching up on sports statistics, oblivious to the subtle battleground the kitchen had become. I decided it was time he knew what was going on, so I poked my head into the living room where he was lounging on the couch. "Hey, you got a sec?" I asked. Jerry glanced up briefly, looking as if he was worried about missing an important moment in his game. "What's up, babe?" he responded. "Your mom and Olivia, they just barge in, take over, and criticize everything I do. It's like they're on a mission to find faults," I blurted out. Lisa, they mean well, They're just," Jerry trailed off, scratching his head. "I'll talk to them, they'll chill out," he assured me, albeit somewhat absent-mindedly. Returning to the kitchen felt like entering the final round of a hostile cook-off where I was the sole competitor and the judges were ruthlessly critical. "So, Lisa, when's dinner?" "Jerry must be starving," Olivia remarked, eyeing me as if I were a servant. "Whenever the chili decides it's ready," I replied with a light tone, maintaining a delicate balance in my response. Dinner finally made its way to the table, and I could feel the weight of their scrutinizing eyes. Mrs. Mary stirred her chili, inspecting each bean as if it contained cosmic secrets. "Bit different from how I make it," she commented eventually, which I interpreted as her polite way of saying, "Nice try, but you can't compete with me." Thankfully, Jerry jumped into the conversation with enthusiasm. "Babe, this is awesome, right, Mom?" he said, trying to lighten the mood. Olivia just sighed heavily, and Mrs. Mary shrugged as if reluctantly agreeing with a harsh food critic. After they left, with Jerry patting his belly and claiming everything was fine, I watched the door close behind them, feeling diminished, like I was losing at a game I hadn't agreed to play. The next time they visited, it was the same old story, unchanged despite my hope that Jerry's intervention might make a difference. I realized that integrating into Jerry's family was the true challenge, and they had a fixed idea of family that didn't include me yet. If this was what married life was like, I was ready to skip the honeymoon phase. On one particularly slow day, as time seemed to drag like syrup dripping from a bottle, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Mary. "Lisa," her voice was stern, exacerbating my headache. "You think you can just snatch Jerry away from us, huh?" Her words stung like vinegar on a paper cut. I glanced at Jerry, hoping for some reaction to his mother's harsh tone, but there was none. He remained focused on the TV, as unresponsive as a statue. "Mrs. Mary, it's not like that. We're just trying to set up some boundaries," I explained, my voice tight with restraint. Boundaries, she scoffed. That's just a fancy word for shutting us out. You can't do that to us, to me. He's my son. As I fought back my frustration, Jerry finally spoke up, indicating he was ready to address the situation. Jerry didn't quite back me up as I hoped during the call with his mother. Is everything okay? Lisa's not. She's not being unreasonable, I guess, he said, his voice lacking conviction, reminding me of soggy cardboard. I just can't believe this, Mrs. Mary responded, sounding genuinely hurt. First, Olivia tells me Lisa is making a fuss over our visits, and now this? Jerry looked at me with raised eyebrows, as if I were the problem's source. Olivia said that, he questioned, clearly taken aback.
Yes, she did.
And I think she's right. Family is family, Jerry. You can't just turn your back on us, Mrs. Mary pressed, her words pulling at Jerry's heartstrings. I watched, feeling helpless, as the man I loved seemed to deflate, his spirit fading like a balloon days after a party. The call ended with a promise of another family meeting, which felt more like a diplomatic summit where the terms of my capitulation would be discussed. Afterward, Jerry resumed his spot on the couch, lost in a marathon of channel surfing, as if our conversation never happened. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mary continued her drive-by criticisms, each a lesson in passive aggression, and Olivia, she was like a puppeteer, pulling Jerry's strings whenever she pleased. When I learned that Olivia was spreading rumors about me around town, my frustration peaked, but I knew better than to react impulsively. I decided to confront her directly, waiting for the perfect opportunity, which presented itself sooner than expected. I spotted Olivia at the market on a Saturday morning. She was busy shopping and didn't notice me approaching. Olivia, I called out firmly. She looked up and rolled her eyes. What do you want, Lisa? We need to talk. It's about the stories you've been spreading, I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. She snorted, a smirk crossing her face. Stories? I don't know what you're talking about. The rumors, Olivia, about me being bossy and all that. Cut it out, I insisted. She laughed, juggling an apple in her hand mockingly. And what are you going to do if I don't? Do you think you can boss me around? I'm serious, Olivia. Spreading lies isn't just mean, it's slander. And I won't stand for it, I replied, maintaining my composure. Her laughter grew louder. You're going to sue me? Get real, Lisa.
You ain't got the stomach for that.
People's reputations are at stake. I'm serious. Keep it up, and yes, I will take legal action if I need to, I warned. Her arrogance was palpable as she leaned in close, her face inches from mine. Bring it on, Lisa. Do your worst, she challenged, then spun on her heel, almost toppling a display of canned beans, and strutted away. Her laughter echoed down the aisle long after she had left. I walked home slowly, turning over the events in my mind. Later that day, when Jerry returned, I told him what had happened. He was midway through taking off his boots and froze, one boot off, the other still on. You did what now? Did you tell Olivia off? You threatened her with legal action if she didn't stop spreading rumors. His face flushed with anger, then paled. You couldn't just let it go? Why'd you have to stir the pot, Lisa? I straightened up, my resolve firm. Because it's not right, and I won't be walked over. Not by her, not by anyone. We stood in silence for a long while, the tension thick between us. After our intense exchange, Jerry and I sat in silence, each lost in thought. The weight of our disagreement had drawn a definitive line between us, signaling this was more than just a simple family disagreement. I needed to stand my ground. Jerry, meanwhile, seemed frozen, that familiar look of bewilderment now seemingly etched permanently on his face. I flopped onto the couch, my mind racing. The gossip might die down for a bit, but Olivia was relentless, like a weed that refuses to be pulled. There was no telling when she might stir up trouble again. And Jerry, well, whether he would ever muster the courage to stand up to his family was still up in the air. For now, I just needed to breathe and strategize my next steps in this increasingly complicated family drama. Dealing with Olivia had me mentally drafting a pros and cons list of my relationship with Jerry's family. I had signed up for a life with Jerry, not an ongoing soap opera with his kin. As the idea of divorced began to echo in my mind, unsettlingly akin to a loose change in a dryer, Mrs. Mary, town gossip and Olivia's champion, chose that moment to call. "Lisa, dear," she chirped, her tone falsely sweet, like a bird that's spotted a worm. "We're hosting a little celebration for Olivia's engagement at Pietro's next week. We'd love to see you there." Her voice oozed insincerity, the kind that seemed to challenge, "I dare you to show up." After hanging up, I stared at the silent phone, a sense of foreboding settling in. This invitation smelled like a trap. "Guess who's got plans for us next week?" I blurted out to Jerry, who was sitting at the kitchen table, his forehead wrinkled in thought. "Who's scheming now?" I added pointedly. "Your sister's engagement party," I said flatly. "We're invited, courtesy of Mrs. Mary." Jerry's face paled, the creases in his forehead deepening. "Oh hell," he muttered, echoing my sentiments perfectly. "So, what's the play here, Jerry? Do we just roll over and play nice, or what?" I pressed, frustrated by his silence. Jerry finally looked up, his eyes serious. "Lisa, it's family. I think we should go." I crossed my arms, feeling the anger rise. "And let Olivia have a field day?" "I'm not their punching bag," I countered. Jerry threw up his hands, a bit too dramatically. "What do you want me to say?" "That's my sister, Lisa." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "And I'm your wife. Or does that not count for much these days?" The words divorce lingered on the tip of my tongue, but I held it back. Jerry ran his hand through his hair, making it stand on end as if he'd touched a live wire. "Of course it counts. Look, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place here." "Well, guess what, sweetheart?"
So am I.
"I married you, not your constant need to please your family at my expense," I shot back. Jerry stood, walked over, and took my hands in his rough, work-worn hands. "Lisa, I love you. I do. And I hate that it's come to this. Let's not go to the party. You and me, we're a team, right?" It was the first time in a long while he'd chosen me over them without hesitation. It felt like discovering an oasis in the desert. That night, the idea of divorce quietly receded, not completely gone, but out of sight for now. Sleeping lightly, almost like a watchful dog, was enough for me to catch my breath and hold on to the hope that Jerry and I could find solid ground again. When we arrived at Pietro's for Olivia's engagement party, the place was bustling, walls vibrating with loud laughter and the clink of glasses. I immediately spotted Mrs. Mary, reigning like a queen at the center table, exuding an air of dominion. Olivia was beaming as if she had won the lottery, and her fiancé, Walter, looked like a deer caught in headlights, clearly overwhelmed. His parents seemed equally out of place, stiff and awkward as if they had stumbled into the wrong movie. No sooner had we stepped inside than Mrs. Mary locked onto me with a hawkish gaze. "Lisa," she cooed as if I were a child stepping out of line, "you'll be taking care of the bill tonight, right? To show you're one of us." I nearly choked on my drink.
What?
"Why me?" The entire table turned to listen, the air thick with anticipation of drama. "Traditions, sweetheart," Mrs. Mary smiled, stretching the word. "The newest family member shows their commitment." My jaw snapped shut so quickly that I thought I might chip a tooth. "Commitment? Sounds more like a shakedown," I retorted, unable to hide my indignation. The crowd perked up, sensing a spectacle. Mrs. Mary puffed up, offended. "Excuse me? That's uncalled for," she declared. Jerry leaned in, his voice a desperate whisper. "Just do it, Lisa. It's not a big deal." "A big deal?" I hissed back, my whisper turning into a growl. "No thanks, I'm nobody's piggy bank." Jerry's hiss was barely audible, yet crystal clear. "Pay the damn bill, Lisa, or we're through." "I mean it." My laughter was bitter, sharp as a snapped cable.
You're not serious.
His expression was all stone and resolute. "You think I'm playing?" I stared him down. Divorce over this? His family-first mantra was shaking me to my core. And where do I fit in, huh? It was showdown time. Even Walter and his parents watched, bewildered by the unfolding drama. I pushed back my chair and stood up, my voice ringing out clear and firm. "No, I'm not doing this dance." The room fell into a stunned silence. Some whispered, and others gaped. Jerry's face flickered red and white, like a malfunctioning stoplight. Mrs. Mary seemed on the verge of an explosion. I walked out into the cool, dark night, the air tasting of freedom. The door slammed behind me, sealing the chaos within as I made my quick escape. My heart raced, but it was Jerry who had thrown out the word divorce, not me. I'd barely settled into a dive bar with a strong drink when my phone rang. It was Jerry. I hesitated, considering not answering, but I did. "Lisa, listen, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say divorce." Jerry's voice was rushed, filled with regret. Before I could respond, Olivia's voice burst through, loud and angry. "You've ruined my engagement dinner. You selfish." The phone must have switched hands abruptly. I could almost feel the venom in Olivia's voice. In the background, Mrs. Mary's voice was clear. "Why should I pay? He's your son. You pay the bill. I won't have my daughter married into a family that doesn't know how to treat." The chaos from Pietro spilled through the phone like a reality show gone wrong, without a single laugh to lighten the mood. People were arguing, their voices a tangled mess of accusations and offenses. Pushing away from the bar, my newfound calm lent clarity to my voice. "Olivia, chill out. It's your mom creating the drama, not me," I said evenly. From the other end, Jerry's faint whisper cut in, urging me to hang up. "Hang up, Lisa," he said, nearly drowned out by Olivia's continued ranting. I wasn't about to engage in their family circus any longer. I ended the call, ignoring the cascade of missed calls and unread texts that likely spun the same narrative of guilt and blame. Turning to the bartender, I asked for another drink. He nodded, pouring another shot silently. Around me, the bar hummed quietly, regulars lost in their worlds. I was trying to gather my thoughts when my phone lit up again with Jerry's name. Resolute, I flipped the phone face down, letting it ring through to voicemail. Conversing now seemed futile, especially with the chaotic backdrop I had just escaped. Several drinks later, the door creaked open, admitting a chill gust of evening air. I didn't bother looking up, too absorbed in my reflections. I was here in this bar, not because I enjoyed the ambience, but because my in-laws had cast me as their bank and my supposed partner had turned it into an ultimatum. Picking up my phone, I typed out a message to Jerry. "We're done. Olivia can think what she wants, and your mom can deal with her damn bill. I won't be part of this circus anymore." As I hit send, the phone rang once more. This time, I powered it off. I was done with the arguing, the unrealistic demands, and most of all, tired of feeling alone in what was supposed to be a supportive partnership. With the room finally ceasing its metaphorical spin, my mind cleared, and I knew what needed to happen next. It was time to look forward, even if that meant going it alone. No more games, no more being the scapegoat for a family that couldn't look beyond their drama. I walked out of the bar, leaving the noise and the night behind. The air was getting colder, and the city lights began to blur into the impending darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was mine to choose. The chaos at the restaurant had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. The evening had exploded, culminating in the groom calling off the engagement right then and there. Olivia's expression when he declared he'd had enough was unforgettable, shock and disbelief written all over her face. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mary had lost it, her screams echoing through the venue, causing such a scene that the groom's family almost called 911. It was the kind of chaos typical of trashy daytime TV shows, complete with the potential for flying chairs. In the wake of that disaster, I filed for divorce and severed all phone ties with Jerry. His calls went unanswered, and his messages were deleted. The last I heard, he, his sister, and the infamous mother-in-law from hell were all holed up in the same house, likely driving each other mad. As for me, life had become simpler, like surfacing for air after years of being submerged. I was finally breathing freely, embracing the tranquility of my new life. That infamous evening still crops up whenever I encounter people from my old social circle. Honestly, it gets tiring. So, for those who are still interested, here's a little update. I'm living my best and most peaceful life now. These days, you can find me at my favorite cafe just down the street from my apartment. It's the kind of place where the coffee is robust and the patrons aren't prying. The barista knows me well. When I walk in, he just nods and asks, the usual, as if he's confirming something as obvious as whether the sky is blue. Yep, I reply, settling into the familiar rhythm of my new, uncomplicated life. Work is a breeze now that it's just work. No family dramas or meddling in-laws to navigate. My free time is truly mine, devoid of guilt trips and unwanted obligations. I spend evenings curled up on my old couch, the one piece of furniture that has survived all my moves. Sure, its springs have seen better days, but it contours perfectly to my back. I usually watch a crime show, where the bad guys get caught by minute 30, and it's the predictability that I find soothing. There's a peacefulness to my life now. It's not eerie or lonely, just profoundly peaceful. I breathe in and breathe out, enjoying the absence of eggshells beneath my feet or the need to mend family rifts. This is what living should feel like. When I go to bed each night, it's with a sense of accomplishment. No external validation needed. I know my worth, and I'm finally living in a way that honors it. While eating lunch one day, my phone dings with a message from an unknown number. It's probably Jerry trying to reach me using someone else's phone. I delete the message unread. Not today, Satan. Not ever, I mutter to myself. People used to warn me I'd regret my choices, but here I am, without a single regret in sight. The days unfold pleasantly, each ending with a glass of something smooth and a book I've been meaning to read. The heroine is tough but fair, and she reminds me a bit of someone I know, myself.